The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against Evelyn Harper's ears like a held breath. She stood at the mantel, her gnarled fingers brushing the edge of a framed photo, the glass cool under her touch. Thomas smiled back at her. His eyes crinkled from a laugh she could still hear if she closed her eyes. It was their 40th anniversary, 2 years before the world broke apart. The lavender from the garden drifted through the open window, mingling with the faint must of the old farmhouse. Evelyn set the frame down gently, her heart heavy with a grief that hadn't dulled in 5 years. "Gran, you okay?" Lily's voice cut through the silence, sharp and curious. The 16-year-old stood in the doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder, dark curls spilling from a loose ponytail. Her school uniform was rumpled, a testament to her disregard for rules she deemed pointless. Evelyn forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Just dusting, sweetheart. How was school?" Lily shrugged, dropping her bag by the couch with a thud. "Same old. You look, I dunno, sad. More than usual." "Old ladies get lost in their thoughts sometimes," Evelyn said, waving a hand. "Go do your homework." Lily lingered a moment, her brow furrowed, but she didn't press. Her footsteps echoed up the stairs, leaving Evelyn alone again with the photo. Thomas's face seemed to watch her, as if he could see through the years to this moment. She could almost hear his voice, warm and steady, telling her to stop fussing over the past. But the past wasn't a quiet thing. It clawed at her, sharp and unyielding, especially today. Today was the anniversary of the day he left her, the day the world turned cruel in ways she hadn't expected. 5 years ago, Thomas had collapsed in the kitchen, a mug of coffee slipping from his hand as he clutched his chest. Evelyn had screamed his name, her knees hitting the linoleum beside him, her hands fumbling for the phone. The paramedics were kind but too late. By the time the sun set, Thomas was gone, and Evelyn was alone in a house that felt too big, too empty. She'd sat on the couch, still in the black dress she'd worn to the hospital, staring at the wall as if it could give her answers. She hadn't expected Harold to show up that night. Thomas's older brother had always been a shadow in their lives, a man of gruff words and fleeting visits. He'd arrived with a bottle of whiskey and a face twisted with grief, or so she thought. She'd let him in, thinking he needed comfort as much as she did. The living room had been dim, the only light from a lamp casting long shadows across the floor. Harold had sat heavily on the couch, pouring himself a glass, then another, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You were never good enough for him," he'd said, his voice low and cutting, the words slurring slightly. "You let him work himself to death. You let him die." Evelyn had stood frozen, her grief a cage around her heart. "Harold, please," she'd whispered, her voice trembling. "Not now." But Harold hadn't stopped. His words grew sharper, venomous, blaming her for Thomas's stress, his heart, his death. "You were always weak," he'd spat, rising from the couch, his breath sour with liquor. He deserved better. She'd backed away, her hands raised as if to ward off the accusations, but Harold had followed, his presence looming like a storm cloud. He'd grabbed her arms, his grip bruising, his voice a snarl. She'd tried to pull free, her slipper catching on the rug, and she'd fallen, her elbow striking the coffee table. Pain flared, and she felt the warm trickle of blood seeping through her sleeve. Harold had stood over her, his face unreadable, then turned and left, the door slamming behind him. She'd sat there, crumpled on the floor, her breath hitching as she pressed a trembling hand to her arm. The blood had stained her dress, a dark bloom against the black fabric. She'd cleaned it up before anyone could see, washing the stain in the sink, hiding the bruises under long sleeves. She hadn't told anyone, not her daughter Sarah, not the police, not even Thomas's memory. Shame had sealed her lips and she'd buried the pain deep, where it festered like a wound that never healed. Now, as the afternoon light faded, Evelyn's gaze drifted to the mantel again. Behind the photo frame, barely visible, was the edge of an old journal, its leather cover worn from years of neglect. Her fingers hesitated, then pulled it free, dust rising like ghosts. She opened it, the pages crackling, and found an entry dated October 12, 2020. Her handwriting was jagged, the words spilling out like a confession she hadn't meant to make. "Thomas is gone. I keep waiting for him to walk through the door, to laugh at me for worrying. Harold came tonight. He said things I can't unhear. My arm hurts. I don't know why I'm writing this. I don't want to remember. Evelyn's throat tightened. She'd stopped writing after that, unable to face the truth on paper. But the journal held more, fragmented entries, half sentences, as if she'd been trying to piece herself back together. She closed it, her hands shaking, and tucked it back behind the frame. Lily's laughter drifted from upstairs, a reminder of the life she was fighting to protect. But the past was stirring, and Evelyn knew she couldn't keep it buried forever. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Lily clattering dishes in the kitchen. The girl was trying to make pancakes, a task she undertook with more enthusiasm than skill. Evelyn smiled despite herself, pulling on a cardigan to cover the faint scars on her arm. Scars she'd explained away as a fall. "Gran, you gotta try these," Lily said, sliding a plate of uneven pancakes across the table. "I added cinnamon this time." Evelyn took a bite, the warmth of the gesture softening the ache in her chest. "Not bad, kiddo. You're getting better." Lily grinned, but her eyes were sharp, watching Evelyn too closely. "You didn't sleep, did you? You've got those shadows under your eyes." Evelyn waved her off. "I'm fine. Just old age catching up." But Lily wasn't fooled. She leaned forward, her voice softer. "Gran, you don't have to pretend with me. I know something's wrong. Is it Grandpa? Or something else?" Evelyn's heart stuttered. She wanted to tell Lily everything, to unburden herself of the weight she'd carried for 5 years. But the words caught in her throat, trapped by the same shame that had silenced her then. "It's just the anniversary," she said finally. "It hits hard." Lily nodded, but her expression said she didn't believe it. She cleared the plates and headed to school, leaving Evelyn with the journal and a decision she wasn't ready to make. She spent the day cleaning, gardening, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. But by evening, the journal was in her hands again, its pages demanding to be read. She sat at the kitchen table, the house settling around her, and turned to another entry, dated a week after Thomas's death. "I saw Harold at the funeral. He didn't look at me. I don't know if I'm relieved or angry. Sarah keeps asking why I'm so quiet. I can't tell her." Evelyn's eyes burned with unshed tears. She'd been so careful, so determined to protect her family from the truth. But the truth was a living thing, clawing its way to the surface. The phone rang, startling her. It was Clara, her oldest friend, inviting her to the bookstore for tea. "You sound like you need to get out of that house, Evie," Clara said, her voice warm but firm. Evelyn agreed, slipping the journal into her purse. Maybe Clara, with her therapist's insight and friend's compassion, could help her make sense of the chaos in her heart. The walk to the bookstore was short, the autumn air crisp against her skin. The town was small, its streets lined with brick storefronts and maple trees shedding red leaves. Clara's bookstore, the open page, was a haven of worn wood and soft light, the shelves crammed with books and the air scented with coffee. Clara greeted her with a hug, her silver braids swinging as she poured tea. "You look like you're carrying the world," Clara said, sliding a mug across the counter. Evelyn managed a weak smile. "Feels like it." They talked about small things, Lily's school, the new pastor at church, but Evelyn's mind kept drifting to the journal. Finally, she pulled it out, her hands unsteady. "I wrote some things after Thomas died. Things I never told anyone." Clara's eyes softened, but she didn't push. "You don't have to tell me, Evie, but if you want to, I'm here." Evelyn opened the journal, her voice barely above a whisper as she read the entry from that night. Clara listened, her face calm but her hands tightening around her mug. When Evelyn finished, Clara reached across the counter, squeezing her hand. "You didn't deserve that," Clara said. "None of it." Evelyn nodded, tears spilling over. "I know, but I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "You were protecting yourself, Evie, and your family, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore." They talked until the bookstore closed, the words easing something in Evelyn's chest. Clara suggested writing a letter to Harold, not to send, but to say what she couldn't then. The idea felt daunting, but it sparked something in Evelyn, a flicker of defiance. She walked home under a sky streaked with stars, the journal heavy in her purse, her resolve growing. That night, she sat at her desk, a blank page before her. The words wouldn't come easily, but she started anyway, her pen scratching against the paper. Harold, you took something from me that night. But I'm taking it back. The journal lay open on the kitchen table, its pages yellowed and curling like leaves ready to fall. Evelyn's handwriting, once precise, had turned jagged in the entries from 5 years ago, as if the pen had fought her hand. She sat with a mug of chamomile tea, the steam rising in lazy curls, and read the words she'd tried to forget. October 19, 2020. I keep seeing his face, not Thomas's but Harold's. The way he looked at me like I was nothing. My arm still aches. I told Sarah I fell. She believed me. I hate lying. Evelyn closed her eyes, the memory of that night rushing back like a flood. Harold's voice had been a blade, slicing through her grief. You were never good enough, he'd said, his eyes glittering with something darker than sorrow. She'd stood in the living room, still in her black dress, her hands shaking as she tried to calm him. But Harold hadn't wanted calm. He'd wanted to hurt, to break something, and she'd been there, fragile and unguarded. His grip on her arms had left marks, his words echoing long after he'd gone. Gran! Lily's voice startled her, and Evelyn snapped the journal shut. Her granddaughter stood in the doorway, holding a glass of water, her brow furrowed with concern. You're up late, Evelyn said, forcing her voice steady. Everything okay? Lily set the glass down, her eyes flicking to the journal. You've been weird all week. Like quieter than usual. What's in that book? Nothing you need to worry about, Evelyn said too quickly. Just old ramblings. Lily's frown deepened, but she didn't push. I'm not a kid anymore, Gran. You don't have to hide stuff from me. Evelyn's heart ached at the words, but she only smiled. Go to bed, sweetheart. School tomorrow. When Lily's footsteps faded upstairs, Evelyn opened the journal again, her fingers tracing the date. She hadn't written much after that night, just fragments, as if she couldn't bear to let the truth take shape. But the truth was there, in the bruises she'd hidden, in the way she'd flinched at loud voices for months. The next morning, Evelyn walked to Clara's bookstore, the journal tucked in her purse like a guilty secret. The open page smelled of paper and coffee, a sanctuary of sorts. Clara, with her silver braid and warm eyes, greeted her with a hug. You look like you need to talk, Clara said, pouring tea behind the counter. Evelyn hesitated, then slid the journal toward her. I don't know where to start. Clara's gaze softened. Start with the truth. Write it down, not for him but for you. A letter, maybe. Say what you couldn't say then. Evelyn nodded, the idea both terrifying and freeing. That night, she sat at her desk, a blank page before her, and began to write. Dear Harold, you took something from me that night. The letter lay finished on Evelyn's desk, for pages of words she'd never dared speak aloud. Her hand ached from writing, but her heart felt lighter, as if each sentence had chipped away at the stone in her chest. She read the final lines again. You thought you could break me, Harold, but I'm still here. I'm not your shadow. I'm Evelyn and I choose to live. She folded the pages, her fingers steady now, and tucked them into an envelope she had no intention of mailing. The act of writing had been enough, a reclaiming of her voice, a defiance of the silence she'd carried for 5 years. Gran! Lily's shout echoed from the kitchen, sharp with urgency. Evelyn hurried downstairs, her pulse quickening at the sight of her granddaughter standing by the table, a piece of paper in her hand. What's this? Lily demanded, holding up a printout of an address, Harold's address. I found it online. Why are you looking him up? What did he do to you? Evelyn's breath caught. She'd underestimated Lily's determination, her knack for piecing together clues. How did you? I heard you talking to Clara, Lily said, her voice trembling. You said his name and you sounded scared. Gran, tell me the truth. Please. Evelyn sank into a chair, the weight of Lily's gaze heavier than the journal's secrets. She'd wanted to protect her granddaughter, to keep the ugliness of that night locked away. But Lily's eyes, so like Thomas's, demanded honesty. All right, Evelyn said softly. But you have to promise to listen, not judge. She told the story in halting words, leaving out the worst details but not the truth. Harold's cruelty, the way he'd turned her grief into a weapon, the blood she'd washed away in the sink. Lily listened, her hands clenched, tears streaking her face. Why didn't you tell anyone? Lily whispered when Evelyn finished. I was ashamed. Evelyn admitted. And I wanted to protect you, your mom, everyone. But I'm not ashamed anymore. Lily threw her arms around Evelyn, hugging her fiercely. You're the strongest person I know, Gran. That evening, Evelyn took the envelope to the garden, where Thomas's old bench sat under the oak tree. She lit a match and watched the paper burn, the flames curling the edges until only ashes remained. She scattered them in the soil, feeling a release she hadn't expected. Thanks for watching.